Hello and welcome to the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast. I am your host, Thaddeus Campbell, joined for the second time on this iteration of the podcast by my very good friend, Daniel Whitney from Whitney Development, the CEO, founder, general leader of the ship, captain. I guess captain would be the right phrase, right? If you're leading a ship. All around great dude, man, and really excited to welcome him back. Had a chance to really work with him over the last few months, get to know him even more than I already did, and there's some roads I want to go down. So first of all, thanks for coming back and being willing to talk to me for a half hour.
Yeah, no problem, man. I never need an excuse to talk, so let's do it.
You and I, that's where we battle, right? We go to dinner and it's like, who's going to talk the most, which is a good problem to have our 4-hour dinners later.
We talk like 8 times a day as it is, so this is just like every other time we chat.
We're just happen to record this one.
Yeah, awesome. We shouldn't record our other conversations.
Listen, usually I start off by asking how people got into storage, but we've covered that with Daniel. You can go back and check out his podcast. You can find us on YouTube at Self-Storage Made Simple. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. If you just search Self-Storage Made Simple, there you go. You'd think I could talk. You'll find Daniel's first episode and can get his background story. But there's something that we talked about the last time we were together that really piqued my interest in, and I want to talk to you about it because you've been a grinder from the beginning. We talked about when you were going to school, right? And you've kind of been involved in construction from high school on. But when you went to school, to college, you didn't just go to college. You've been working multiple jobs the whole way through. Tell me a little bit about that time and why you were going to college and what you were doing and how busy you were.
Sure. So, I've always been a firm believer in that, no matter what you're doing, you should be working, right? You should be making money. You should be making dollars. I mean, that's just is what it is, right? I mean, too many guys go to school and they just say, oh, I'm just going to do the school thing. Then they kind of come out with no, real experience. And I got to tell you something. I interview these guys all the time. People want to get entry-level positions and you're just like, yeah, on paper, you have the education, but in person, you don't even look like you can put your pants on right. I think that practical experience is so much more. I personally believe that practical experience is so much more important than actual education in a lot of ways. Right. So you have a lot of guys out there that are, we have the finance majors, we have these guys, this, that, the other thing. But some of these guys, first of all, super intelligent number guys, right? They can sit there with a spreadsheet all day, but you have to be able to take that spreadsheet, really move it outside of the computer and into the real world. So as I was coming up, I was always working construction. I was actually a carpenter when I was younger. I did a lot of, basements, bathrooms, kitchens. I actually ended up, being more of a finished carpenter. So that's kind of my attention to detail on a lot of things. So I was big on, kitchens, trim work, doors, that kind of stuff, real custom stuff. And then, even while I was going to school later on in life, I always made sure that, hey, I was, working at the same time. I think it's so important. Plus, if you're not grinding, what are you doing? You're just going to sit around and do nothing. Maybe it's just me. I just have a terrible attention deficit disorder, but I just can't, I don't want to sit around. I have energy. So, if I'm just sitting here on the couch, that's not doing anything for me. So you should always be using that time that you have to really progress yourself. But, you can learn anything you want in a classroom, right? Someone tells you, hey, just for example, I know a few guys that are they're good project managers now, but when they graduate from school with project management degrees, they'd be like, oh yeah, we went to school for project management. They can recite you the textbook. You actually put them on a job site and they're just, they don't know their ass from their elbow, essentially, right? They don't know which way is up. Whereas if you can do that schooling and apply it practically at the same time, it's going to just catapult you through your career so much earlier on. So that's the big mistake that a lot of guys make. And then a lot of guys also kind of go to these, if you're doing I'm just going to use construction management as an example, because that's kind of, a lot of what we do, the development management, all that kind of stuff, right? So with the construction management guys, they go to school and they say, oh, well, after this, you're going to go work for, the Tishmans of the world. You're going to go work for Structure Tone. These guys have great companies, mind you, awesome companies to go work for. Later on in life, in my opinion, because you get stuck on a crew, you're, a quote unquote assistant project manager, but you're one of 30 guys running a project. And by the way, all you're running is the HVAC part of it. Right.
Yeah.
So like there's not like, in my opinion, it's not real project management, right? Like you need to be put on. I mean, I think everyone should have to, their first project should always be a storage site. I think that should be the case, storage or retail, right? Because like that's where someone's really driving that schedule into. You're one guy against 30 or 40 guys, right? Like that's where like the rubber really meets the road. So I mean that's my opinion on it. But you know me, Thaddeus. I got a lot of opinions.
Your answer was ADHD special. I love it. You gave an amazing answer, but not to the question I asked, which is typical Dan Whitney, which I friggin' love.
No, what's the
Listen,
question?
I'm
Ask
gonna
it.
get a little more specific, right? You went to college. You were driving ambulance as a paramedic, and you were
Oh yeah,
running.
yeah, I
You
did do
build
that.
houses. Like you said you're a finished carpenter,
Well, I
which
was also well.
weird, but
Look,
you
when
also
I was
ended up owning your own company.
when I was younger in life, I really do. I mean, still to this day, I enjoy the medical stuff, right? I still do. So like the paramedic thing, like I started doing ambulance work through volunteering for a first aid squad in the town I was from, because I just thought like, hey, look, I thought this was really cool. Like, it's good to give back to your community, all this kind of stuff. And as I got into it, I realized I was pretty good at it. And I said, hey, let's go to medic school. Let's do all this stuff. So I got sponsored through to that whole thing. Ended up riding a truck in Newark for a while. And riding a medic truck in Newark, New Jersey on the night shift is something special. Let's just say that.
Not something you hear from every project development specialist that you go deal with.
No, I mean, but something like it was a wild experience. But at the same time, I was also like building. That was when I was actually on the carpentry side of things. So I was building houses by day, and at nighttime, I would go ride that truck. And I mean, like that's, it wasn't because I needed to dollar wise. It wasn't a money thing. It was more like hey, these are the two things I love doing. One of these is going to end up, being where I go. So let's do both of them at the same time. And then I mean, like. I could have done the med school thing. I could have done that whole thing, but why even? First of all, I couldn't even imagine myself as a doctor. That would just be silly. But I mean, like, realistically, like, I didn't want to do that much school. Like, I didn't want to go do it. And I don't think, like I said, I like to do both at the same time. I wanted to check it out. Working in Newark was a great experience, absolutely incredible. But you get 10 years experience in 6 months. Because you're rolling up to that hospital and you're not even turning those lights off. You're leaving them on. You're running in. You're running back out. I mean, it's a busy place.
I'm interested to know how much that tempered you when you're obviously you're dealing with some crazy stuff in Newark, New Jersey, working a night shift in an ambulance. How much does that temper you when stuff's going sideways on a project? Where it's just not as much of a big deal because of what you've experienced in an ambulance.
Wow, that's a really good question.
That's what I strive for, Daniel.
I mean, Thaddeus, I think you've seen there are situations where I tend to where there's situations where I will go off. Right, there are certain situations because I have a general disdain for stupidity. Like so there's those situations that'll that get me riled up. But I mean, it definitely does
I think that's
help.
why we like each other.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you see so many different things when you're riding on an ambulance, right? You see, everything from obviously the bad things. You also see good things, right? You see children being born and that kind of stuff. And you get used to working under pressure. I mean, you have to be, in order to do this job well, you have to be able to work under pressure because you're going to have 20 different things thrown at you once. And by the way, it's not going to be every day. Like what was it? Just yesterday, everything that could have pissed me off, right? Like everything that could have, it was 5 different projects, 5 different people doing stupid things all at the same time. And you have to go ahead and manage those 5 stupid things, but you have to make sure you keep your head cool enough where you can actually think clearly to get those 5 things done in a manner that's not going to cost anyone money, B, cost the project schedule. And also some of these were construction items. So it's like also make sure people don't get hurt. right? Like you have to make sure that you manage those couple of things. So yeah, I mean, it definitely helps. I mean, everyone has their moments. I think everyone has their moments, but you gotta work under pressure. And the ambulance definitely helped with that. I mean, everything does. It's just who I am as a person, I guess, at this point.
So one of the real reasons I wanted to bring you back on the podcast is our team at Safe Storage USA. We've been talking a lot about what's going on in self storage at the moment, both on the value add side, looking to buy projects that might be viable as a way to create a return on investment in a 5 to 7 year window, and then on ground up development. You see so many projects because of your role. At any given time, you're managing 10 to 20 projects for different developers, different equity groups around the country, but you're also seeing way more projects come across your desk. So you're sort of uniquely positioned. You might see as many self-storage projects as anybody sees that's not a third-party management company, maybe even more than them. I'm interested to get your take on where we are right now in the kind of life of self-storage. Obviously, it became such a well looked upon asset class, especially during COVID. Kind of, maybe not quite as excited right now, but I'm interested to get Daniel Whitney's take on where the industry is, what the opportunities are. Is there still a good amount of money to be made in self-storage?
Yeah, I mean, look, I still think there's a ton of money to be made in self storage. I do, and I think it's all, it's like anything else. It's deal specific. So, like, I think the expectation on land cost is starting to come back into the realm of making sense, right? Because for a long time, there was a lot of sellers out there that just had stupid expectations. Let's just call it what it was, right? I think a lot more sellers are starting to get that, but I think a lot more sellers are starting to get jittery on the time that a buyer needs to get a piece of land approved. And I do think that a lot more people are getting more jitters about needing variances for projects, right? So that's one piece of it. And yeah, we do see a ton of deals. I mean, we underwrite, I don't even know how many deals we underwrite in a month, but it's a lot. And not everything works.
Two, three a day minimum, right? You're underwriting
2 or 3 a day.
deals a month.
Yeah, something like that. So, like, for a lot of these deals, right? Like, construction costs have come down. We've seen on our side, at least, we've seen construction costs come down significantly. A lot of guys are still scared on the construction cost side of things because I think there's still just a lot of people putting things together incorrectly. So I think that's been affecting a lot, right? We just got involved with a deal where it was put together completely incorrectly, right? The guy was at like $145 a square foot, and I think in the next month and a half, don't even get me started. But the next, I mean, and again, but these are guys they own a couple of facilities. This is their first big one. This is their first like big multi-story thing. Great guys, incredible group of people. And, they're going to be closer down to like high 70s, 80s when we're done with it. Right. I mean, like that's a lot of what's going on still to this day. I mean, we've got projects coming out of the ground for $72. So I think that those are 3 stories with underground stormwater, retaining walls, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we got some wild pricing coming in right now. So I think
that given that we got a few projects in the pipeline right now.
Don't worry, Thaddeus. I got you taken care of. But, I do think that the market itself it's in an interesting spot because I think we're in a space where we keep getting the promises that the rates are coming down. So I think there's more and more people are going to start getting involved again. There was a big scare in the rate, right? But I mean, it was a very interesting time to buy because when you could find those opportunities that you were getting the right price for, these things were still penciling, right? And I think the big part of that is, it's always going to be your land cost and it's always going to be your construction cost. I mean, the rates, I think we just have to get used to somewhat. I mean, we're not going to see 3%, 2%, any of that kind of money anytime soon, I don't think. So I think it's about setting expectations.
Let's hope not.
No, I think it's about setting expectations, man. I think people have to kind of figure, you used to underwrite things to 30 plus IRRs, like in the 20s are great returns. Those are great
Yeah.
returns. And I mean, you're still
Yeah.
seeing those 30 projects, by the
You're
way.
doubling your money in 4 years or less.
I mean, some of the stuff we've underwritten for you recently, I mean, that stuff's coming in crazy returns. It just depends on what you're building, what you're getting. But I mean, it
Yeah,
also depends
no,
on.
insane.
But I mean, also, like, one of the things that people always say is like, oh, well, if I put this here, can someone else outposition me here or there, right? And I mean, that's always a fear that people have when building storage. Is like, hey, look, I put this guy here. What if someone else builds one down the street? Or that, hey, who's this other guy developing this over here? But even then, like, I've opened facilities across from facilities that had just opened like recently, and they're still leasing up like crazy. I mean, there's still that need for storage that people want. So I think it's good. I mean, we're still underwriting a ton. There's still a lot of guys picking up new deals. There's still a lot of guys doing stuff. Um, I don't think everything is I don't think every single deal is going to be a grand slam at this point, just because of the interest rate, right? I mean, it's very hard to find that. And if you do find it, I mean, that's a unicorn. Make sure you capture it and keep it because we want to study it. But I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's it's an interesting market right now for sure because there's a lot of people still scared of all that stuff. But I think there's a lot of positivity out there too.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because you opened the door for me, brought up the couple of deals that Safe Storage USA is working on, which ironically are not storage, even though our name is Safe Storage USA. We're looking at some small bay industrial flex, and you've had some experience building this product, and you were gung ho when we brought the projects to you. What is it about that space that you like?
I mean, it's big storage, right? It's like if you look at the model, it's really just big storage, right? So I think that it's a really cool thing because a lot of, on the storage side of things, a lot of guys are starting to put these kind of man cave units in, things like that into these facilities, right? Those bigger units. And I think the cool part about the Flex Industrial is that if you look at the cost to build, it's a little bit less. You need a lot more parking, you need a lot more impervious. There's a lot more of that kind of stuff you have to deal with, right? Circulation, you have to deal with trucks and so on and so forth. But all you're renting at the end of the day is storage, right? But the nice thing is now you don't have to worry about move-ins, move-outs. You're doing 3-year triple net leases. But when you actually like look at the numbers, so like I actually meant to talk to you about this. We did this the other day, and if you look at the costs, the cost per square foot to rent one of those flex industrial spaces with the triple net and all that stuff, then you look at what it costs to build Drive Up, for example, right? It's really like almost equal, or in some circumstances, you're getting more for the flex, but you're locking in a lease for 3 years. So it's really a cool space. Right. It's an interesting space because you don't have. It's almost like storage in that a lot of zoning ordinances don't contemplate it yet, right? So when you're looking it up, a lot of stuff has mini storage in it, right? But the mini storage, you know how that goes, guys. We've looked at this a million times. It's like, oh, the building's only allowed to be 10 feet tall, and you're only allowed 6,000 square feet per building or something stupid. But for the flex, it's like, where does it fit into the mold, right? Because is it warehousing? Yeah, it's warehousing, but it's also like more like a business park, right? So like the one we're looking at, it falls into light industrial. But it's like they don't contemplate this stuff yet. It's a really cool asset class, and it's clean, and it should be relatively easy to run.
So that's such an interesting thing, and it's something that's a driver for Safe Storage USA, and why we're going into this. We actually look at it as a bonus that it's not contemplated in a lot of places because it simply hasn't been built a ton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's not a ton of it out there, but I got to tell you something, like, construction guys are still, I mean, the market has slowed down a little bit, right? Because you have people kind of stopped with the hotel development, multi-res development slowed down a lot, all that kind of stuff, right? Storage stayed strong, but storage did slow down. Warehousing slowed down a little bit as well. I mean, everything just slowed down, right? So, but you still have construction guys who are very busy. So there's still work going on out there. And these construction guys, I mean, the big thing is like most construction companies, like if, let's just say XYZ electrician, he's starting that business out of his house. And if he needs to grow that business, there's not a place for him to grow that into. And self-storage was a good place for that to happen. But a lot of self-storage has kind of grown into being the climatized stuff. And these guys want to be able to pull up. They want to have a little office. They want to have an outlet in there. They can charge their batteries for the next day, do whatever it is they're doing. So that's where the flex industrial comes in. And I think a lot of these guys, I mean, you know, when I was doing it, I would have loved it if there was space like that available. I remember I rented a little unit. I rented 2 units next to each other because it's all that was available. They were they were odd. I'm not gonna say they were terrible because I don't want anyone who listens to think that I think they're terrible, but they were odd. There were 2 5x20s, and they were purely for just. But I remember being like, oh, I wish there was like a light in here. I wish there was this in here. I wish there was like stuff I could set up and like work, like do some work in here, right? So it's the flex industrial gives you that, and it's not cost prohibitive for these guys to do it. You know, it costs the same as renting office space. This is what they need.
Less than that for our underwriting. We're certainly penciling it out low. I mean, I guess maybe not right now because office space you can pay a penny and get space right now because there's so much vacancy in office space. But relative to storage, it's very cost effective for people, which we're excited about. I want to go back to something earlier you said, which was the hesitation on variance. And I guess I kind of want to pick your brain. One of the things I felt about storage recently is there's 2 things that I have an opportunity to do. I either can go someplace where the entitlement process is so long that, listen, I got a lot of gray hair. I'm a little older than you. I want to be alive when I get the thing out of the ground. Or there's those places where I can go do that, and the rates are great, and it's not oversaturated, but my entitlement timeline is so long. On the flip side of that is that fear that you brought up, that especially with the price wars that are going on I was on a meeting yesterday with a couple of really high level operators, and they kept using the term race to the bottom as far as rates from the REITs right now. What they're doing with their pricing, the model they're using is just get people in the door for as low of a price as you can, which, okay, great. But if your average tenant's only staying there for 18 months, how high can you really pump their price and make up for that initial discount you got? So the second thing that I find is land that I can go develop, but there's other land available around, and so many guys got on the self-storage bandwagon. I get a little nervous about the guy opening up down the street, quite frankly, which goes to something you said earlier, which was people being scared of variances. In those places where you need a variance, and it's not California where it might take you 3 years, why do you think that's such a good path to go down?
Well, look, all the good land is gone. You know, like there is no more. Like good land is finding the perfect piece of land is nearly impossible, right? Every piece of land is going to have something. And by the way, self-storage is really always going to have some type of variance, right? Because a lot of times we're going for parking waivers, that kind of stuff. So like it depends on the municipality. They're kicking it to the ZBA or they're kicking it to the planning board. But you need to be able to make sure that you can like tell the story of those variances. I feel like that's where a lot of guys get into trouble, because you hear about these guys fighting with cities for like 2 years about getting all these variances done. Then you kind of go back in their notes and you see kind of how they ran it. You're just like, why did you you're just arguing with the guy. Like that's not going to get you anywhere. But variance is like, you know, if you want to be out of those main corridors, right? Like a lot of cities are getting, you know, they're putting in overlay districts or doing this kind of stuff. So like now you have to go into those overlay districts.
Don't tell me about that.
Yeah, I know. Well, it happens, right? So you have to go to these overlay districts or something like that. So you have to look at how you fit into those overlay districts, but they don't necessarily contemplate what uses are going in there. Because city planners, super smart people, but a lot of times they're not looking at the actual market, you know? And, you know, so you want to be on, you know, let's just use New Jersey, for example. You want to be on Route 22 in New Jersey, okay? Over on Route 22 in New Jersey, up by Union, that whole area, you've got empty retail all over the place, right? But the whole thing is retail zoned, you know? But so you go to these guys, say, hey, I want to build XYZ amount of square feet. It's going to be self-storage. Here's why it's a good use. You have to be able to tell the story of why it's a good idea to do this, which that's what we do all the time. But you also need to tell them like, hey, look, like no one is like, yeah, sure, people are building some retail right now, and it is picking back up, which I do like to see because that's great. Um, but they're not building that big stuff anymore, right? You're not building Best Buys, you're not building Targets, you're not building Walmarts. I mean, I think I heard yesterday one of my buddies is building a Dick's Sporting Goods out of the ground, and I was like, when's the last time a Dick's Sporting Goods was built out of the ground? Um, it's that's a wild thing to even say. And I think it's standalone too. So you have to go in and tell those stories, and a lot of times if you can tell it correctly, the people will give it to you, right? It's also sometimes it's not even use. Sometimes it's like, oh well, we need to build this piece of land, but oh, they're only allowing us a 0.25 FAR or something like that. So I'm only getting 50,000 square feet. I need to get 75,000 to pencil. Well, does a basement count? Right? Where are they measuring that? Where are they measuring that from? Do basements what counts towards that FAR? Also, you have to look around at the zone. Like, hey, who else is around me that has 100,000 square feet that's on the same piece of land? You have to just be able to do that research. I think that's where people get scared of it because they see that they and people also just pass by. Like they see the initial ordinance, like, oh nope, it's not by right. We're not doing it. And I think that's just a wasted opportunity. I do. I mean, most of 90% of the work we do is use variance or some type of variance work. And,
I think it's interesting that you say that because while I'm not afraid of a use by right site in certain instances, so many times I see use by right and I get scared a little bit, right? And then I have to go do a different research, which is if this is use by right, is there more empty use by right land around it? Because money's going to go to its highest use, right? So if I'm looking at a piece of land and I think I have the highest use, I'm not the only person in the world who's looking at what I'm looking at. And if there's other by right land available nearby, man, I better make sure I got the only parcel that's available, or I'm begging for somebody to come next door and do the same thing I'm doing.
yeah, but 70% of by right land, even then, has some type of FAR requirement, or you're only allowed to cover like 10. Like I saw the other day, you're allowed 10% lot coverage. I was like, is that even what kind of land use? Who let this land use law pass? Like, who let that go? Like it's just so stupid. It's just so stupid.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, no, but like just because it's by right doesn't necessarily mean it's a good piece of dirt either. And especially if it's been sitting for a while. Like, hey, what's now? Now you're not worried so much about that, but hey, what geotechnically, what's going on with it? What's going on with it environmentally?
Yeah.
Is there some type of endangered species on it? Is there all that stuff? Like we sat on, you and I just sat on a call the other day. We pulled up Zoom and we went through all of it, right? And it took us 45 minutes an hour, but a lot of people don't take that hour. A lot of people don't. They're like, oh, no, this is by right. Cool. We're going to go for it. Then they're like, oh crap, Dan, you wouldn't believe it. We have to, the whole site has to, I had a, who was it? Someone told me the other day, like, oh, I have to dig out like 30 feet. I have to do a 30-foot undercut underneath my whole building. And I was like, what are you talking about? Who told you that? And it's like, then you got to go back and fix that. So it's, every piece of land has its thing now. Everything has its thing. Everything does. There's always going to be a curveball. Just get used to it because that's the way it is now.
Well, listen, brother, we are rapidly approaching the half-hour mark, where I like to keep this thing to a time level where I respect your time and the viewers, man. But if you listen to this and you don't understand the value of a Dan Whitney, and by the way, he's got a whole team behind him that has just as much energy and just as much intelligence level as he does. We're so thankful for the help you've given us. If you're out there and you're looking at a development project and want him to help with it, I cannot more strongly recommend you give him a call. You'll see his information scrolling at the bottom. You can look him up pretty easily. He's a pretty easy guy to find. If you have a hard time getting a hold of him, get a hold of me, and I'll put you in contact with him very easily. But Dan Whitney, Whitney Development, thank you so much for coming and joining the podcast again.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's always great talking to you. I'm sure I'll talk to you in like a half hour from now about something. So not the last time.
Probably in 5 minutes, I would guess. But that's it for this episode of the Safe Storage Made Simple podcast. As always, thank you to PropRise for sponsoring the podcast, outpacing the self-storage market with supercharged deal sourcing. The guys at PropRise are next level with their access to data. Check them out at proprise.io, and we will see you guys next week.